Hello, my friend. I've put together for you a selection of the rarest and most fascinating historical photographs, the kind you probably haven't seen yet. May 1919 in Bavaria. Lathe operator Johann Lehner stands with his hands raised as Freikorps troops close in during the chaos after the German Empire collapsed. On November 13, 1963, United States Navy pilot J. M. Bauckham fired the seat from a Vought RF-8A Crusader and dropped into the sea while the jet kept flying without him. In October 1944, the B-17 Little Miss Mischief returned with a huge torn opening in the left side that nearly split the bomber in two. The ball turret and waist gunners survived, and the crew still brought the Flying Fortress back to base. This grainy black-and-white photo freezes a lone aircraft as a dark cross in the sky, with long wings and a tall tail that look almost unreal. In the mid-20th century, experts could often identify planes from shots like this by comparing wing shapes and shadow lines. This Atlanta Constitution page from February 26, 1950 shows landowner John Wallace calmly talking to a reporter while holding a note meant for his wife. He insisted a fatal shot was an accident. This black-and-white booking photo shows Sirhan holding a California prison number tag after his arrest in 1968. His case became one of the most studied political trials in the United States. In September 1962, James Meredith was escorted by United States Marshals as he tried to enroll at the University of Mississippi while crowds pressed in to stop him from entering. The standoff left hundreds hurt and forced federal control on campus. On August 31, 1991, in Vilnius, an anonymous KGB agent hands over his pistol as the Soviet security office is shut down, with weapons and holsters scattered across the table. Days later, on September 6, Moscow formally recognized Lithuania's independence. In 1959, Fidel Castro appeared on NBC's Meet the Press during a United States visit just months after taking power in Cuba, and told viewers he was not a communist. This clip later became a time capsule of shifting alliances. This is the last known photo of Patrice Lumumba in Congo in 1960, taken as soldiers held him during a fast-moving power struggle. War photographer Horst Voss reportedly gained access by trading a few cans of food and Polaroid prints. In 1945 in British Malaya, surrendered Japanese Gunto swords were laid in a long row for an official handover watched by Allied troops. Many were mass-made for the war, but some hid older family blades inside modern mounts. In 1996 in St. Petersburg, officials opened the city's first McDonald's under arches of red and yellow balloons while cameras and crowds pressed close. Around 1936 in Nuremberg, German military aircraft fly in a tight formation above a huge ruling party rally, turning the sky into a scripted stage. These choreographed flyovers were engineered to broadcast discipline and power to the crowd below. In 1938 London, some post offices would accept ducks, rabbits, and other game as parcels, so a mailbag could sound like a farm on the move. The practice ended after leaking packages began staining letters and turning routine deliveries into a hygiene nightmare. In 1919 Frankfurt am Main, a chimney sweep guild posed in matching work clothes and tall hats, like a full company lined up for inspection. Before gas and electric heating became common, these crews were a citywide safety system. This small white building in Ripon, Wisconsin, is marked as the birthplace of the Republican Party, where an early meeting was held on March 20, 1854. In 1922 Mexico City, a giant Ericsson robot straddled the street as an advertisement, with a rotary dial painted on its chest like a badge of the future. It turned a normal road into a tunnel of modernity. On December 17, 1939, the German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee was scuttled in the River Plate estuary near Montevideo, sending up a thick black cloud as it sank. The crew destroyed it after being cornered. In 1946, a camera riding a V-2 rocket captured one of the first photos of Earth from space, showing the planet's curve long before satellites existed. The film was recovered from the wreckage after the flight, so this view came back to Earth the hard way. This studio scene shows musicians recording live, while a Mickey Mouse cartoon plays on a screen, so every note must land exactly on the action. Before digital editing, these sessions relied on timing sheets and a conductor's cues. In 1935, a Golden Gate Bridge worker walks a narrow wooden catwalk high above the water while the main cables are being built around him. Crews later relied on a pioneering safety net system that saved many lives. In 1945 at Bergen-Belsen, survivors in striped uniforms cook beside a mountain of abandoned shoes after the camp was taken over by Allied troops. The shoe pile shows the scale in one silent detail. In April 1970, Apollo 13 photographed its service module after separation, revealing a whole side peeled open from an oxygen tank rupture. That single torn panel explains why the crew had to use the lunar module as a lifeboat to get home. On November 11, 1918, people in Antwerp packed the street just hours after the armistice announcement, their faces turned into a single sea of hats and relief. This crowd marks the instant the First World War ended for ordinary civilians. On June 27, 1944, near Cherbourg, troops and vehicles crowd the entrance to a German underground stronghold cut into the rock like a hidden doorway. These bunkers were built to keep command posts and stores alive under bombardment. In 1942, near Polyarny, in the Murmansk region, captured German soldiers are escorted in the Arctic war zone, where sea ice and darkness could be as dangerous as the front line. This port mattered because it helped protect the northern supply route into the Soviet Union. These are the twisted remains of the British airship R-101 after it crashed in Olonne, France in 1930 on its first overseas flight. It was the largest airship in the world when built, and only 6 of the 54 people on board survived. An aerial view shows Wessel, Germany in 1945 reduced to a broken grid, with the ground pocked by countless blast craters like a dried lake bed. From above you can see how a city can be erased block by block. In 1916 in German East Africa, a British soldier made a Christmas card on a scrap of khaki uniform and joked that hard times meant this was the best paper he had. The East Africa campaign was fought across huge distances with thin supply lines. The Japanese battleship Nagato is shown scorched and stripped after the 1946 test blasts at Bikini Atoll, with white draft marks painted on the hull so observers could track how fast it settled. It survived the first blast, but later took on water and sank. In 1941, Finland's Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim inspects a Mercedes W-150 state limousine gifted by German leader Adolf Hitler, a rare armored state carriage built for top-level ceremonies. Echo 2, launched in 1964, was a giant shiny balloon satellite built by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration to bounce radio signals back to Earth like a mirror in space. In 1911, 2 women stand with a hand-painted Votes for Women banner, turning a quiet yard into a political statement. Just 7 years later, Britain granted voting rights to many women in 1918. In August 1945 Berlin, a street organ grinder stands beside his handcart while Soviet soldiers watch near ruined buildings and fresh occupation signs. In 1990, an actor in full Borg makeup studies a Star Trek, the Next Generation script, with cables and a mechanical arm strapped on like real industrial gear. The Borg look was built from layered prosthetics. On September 15, 1926, boxer Raymond Johnston posed for a wildly staged sparring photo as a rearing Mustang, boxed with padded hooves. It was part sport, part publicity stunt, because a horse can weigh half a ton. In mid-April 1975 near Xuan Loc, two Chinook helicopters lift out South Vietnamese 18th Division troops, equipment, and families as rotor wash turns the road into a red dust storm. On November 3, 1941, Finnish troops in white winter suits surround a dugout as a captured Soviet soldier calls for his commander to come out. The scene shows how snow camouflage could turn a forest into a trap. In the 1930s in Yevpatoria, kitchen staff at an NKVD sanatorium rehearse cooking in gas masks, stirring huge pots as if a chemical alarm could go off mid-lunch. It is a surreal snapshot of civil defense thinking, where even a dining hall was treated like a front line. In 1966, technicians hand-build the Apollo 11 heat shield, filling a honeycomb structure cell by cell with ablative material. With about 360,000 tiny cells, this was not just engineering, it was patient handwork that stood between the crew and re-entry heat. On December 20, 1919 in England, rows of Christmas turkeys hang like a wall of feathers as shoppers and sellers crowd the market below. After the First World War, holiday food became a symbol of returning normal life. A roadside billboard from the 1960s shouts, "Let's back Nixon," using a confrontational photo of Richard Nixon leaning in close as if mid-argument. Outdoor ads like this were built to hit drivers in a split second, turning a highway glance into a vote. In 1906, the ocean liner Mauretania leaves the River Tyne through a swarm of small boats, its funnels pouring smoke like a moving factory. Built for Cunard, it soon became a speed legend and held the Atlantic record for years. In 1913 in the United States, this school desk could fold into a hammock so a student could lie back without leaving the classroom. It was part of the open-air school era, when fresh air and rest were treated as medical tools and furniture had to transform fast. In April 1924 in California, Charlie Chaplin sits in the snow beside a cluster of hand-cranked cameras while filming the gold rush, showing how silent comedy was built with heavy gear and tough weather. In 1856, Cologne Cathedral still stood unfinished, with a huge medieval wooden crane perched on the south tower where work had stopped in the 1400s. This is a British Matilda Mark II tank in the 1940s, fitted with a strange frame camouflage that turns it into a boxy, almost fake-looking machine. The idea was to break up the tank's familiar outline so distance observers would misjudge what they were seeing. In 1935, men parade through Munich carrying a giant-scale model of a planned art museum, while a swastika emblem hangs above the route. Public displays like this used architecture as propaganda. In 1917, workers hand-make waffle cones in a hot, cramped room, pulling them from iron molds and stacking them in boxes. This is early mass production of an edible container designed so the ice cream could be eaten with no plate, no spoon, and no waste. In Cuba in 1965, Fidel Castro does pull-ups from a patio roof, turning a quiet home scene into a show of stamina. Images like this were used to project energy and control, because a leader who looks physically strong can feel politically untouchable. After the 1960 Valdivia earthquake in Chile, a man sits on the curb in front of collapsed concrete and snapped rebar, as if the street itself has folded. This was the strongest earthquake ever recorded, and it triggered huge sea waves across the Pacific. In 1943, the United States aircraft carrier Yorktown squeezes through the Panama Canal, with sailors lined along the flight deck like a human ruler. The canal let warships jump between oceans in days instead of weeks. Around 1905 to 1910 in Central Oregon, workers climb a rope ladder about 320 feet above the Crooked River just to reach the Oregon Trunk Bridge site. In 1935, a massive crowd fills the Nuremberg rally grounds in strict blocks, facing giant swastika banners and a central podium built for spectacle. The layout was designed like a human grid, so aerial photos could sell power and unity in one frame. Around 1903 in Florida, men in striped prison uniforms stand chained before being leased out to cut timber, a system that turned sentences into private labor contracts. It kept people trapped through fines and arrests. In 1979, two East German families built a homemade hot air balloon with a clothesline rail basket and flew at -8 degrees Celsius with no shelter. After 28 minutes, they landed 6.2 miles beyond the frontier. This Soviet intelligence report dated June 21, 1941 warns of German preparations, but a handwritten note slams one key line as, "This is a lie." The chilling detail is the timing, because within hours the border would erupt. In 1945, American and Soviet soldiers crowd around a table, raising glasses together to celebrate victory in Europe. For a brief moment, the war's two largest armies looked like friends, even though a new rivalry was already forming in the background. In 1944, United States tankers bolt wood frames and stack sandbags on their Sherman to thicken its protection in minutes with whatever they can find. This field armor could help against small anti-tank hits and shrapnel. In 1948 in Saudi Arabia, a small twin-engine plane sits beside an oil derrick while a camel and riders pose in the foreground, old desert travel meeting new industrial speed. This is what first oil looked like on the ground. In 1943, rows of Messerschmitt Bf 109G fighters sit in an assembly hall with engines exposed, showing war production as a conveyor of identical shapes and serial numbers. The scene is chilling because each airframe is only half a plane here, waiting for fuel, guns, and a pilot. In 1943 Paris, a zookeeper washes a giraffe inside its tall indoor stall, the animal towering like a living tower under the lights. Keeping exotic animals healthy required daily care even during wartime shortages. In 1944, German Corporal Alfred Michel stands under guard beside his downed Messerschmitt Bf 109 G14, the cockpit smashed and the cross still visible on the fuselage. In 1948, acrobat Hans Prignitz balances in a handstand on the ledge of St. Michael's Church in Hamburg, with the city spread out far below. One slip would mean open air, so the photo works like a stunt and a skyline portrait in the same breath. In 1945 on Manhattan, a captured German state limousine was displayed indoors, drawing a crowd to stare at a car built like a moving fortress. The shock is how trophies of power became public exhibits overnight. In March 1915, Tsar Nicholas II stands in a Red Cross officers' hospital among wounded men, doctors, and nurses, with bandages and uniforms sharing the same tight space. On March 5, 1953, at Madison Square Garden, New York officials at a boxing night stop watching the ring to read a special edition shouting, "Stalin dead." The instant front-page takeover shows how one death could freeze a whole arena. In 1961, an East German policeman points a mirror at the camera, bouncing sunlight straight into the lens like a flashbang made from a pocket trick. It is a simple anti-photo tactic that turns surveillance into a duel. In July 1940, this backseat view captures Germany's leader riding in a Mercedes-Benz 770K on the road from the Berghof to Munich, with chauffeur Erich Kempke at the wheel. In the underground Mittelwerk plant near Nordhausen, prisoners in striped uniforms assemble wiring for the V-2 rocket, surrounded by hanging cables and harsh workbenches deep inside the mountain. It is a chilling picture of advanced technology built in darkness. These photos show Tiger tank turrets set on huge concrete blocks at the Putlos training range in Germany, turning a moving tank into a fixed bunker so crews could practice aiming, loading, and spotting hits. It is a clever way to reuse the heaviest part of a Tiger. A blindfolded woman types on a mechanical typewriter while a man checks the text, showing an early test of true touch typing with no peeking at the keys. The blindfold turns the skill into a kind of lab proof that speed and accuracy can come from pure muscle memory. Two Cuban Revolution leaders stage a golf scene in the early 1960s, turning a rich man's sport into a dry joke about power and image. The crowd of onlookers makes it feel less like a game and more like a live satire of United States-style leadership theater. Airport workers in Moscow unload a United States Air Force cargo plane packed with humanitarian supplies in 1992 during the brutal shortages that followed the collapse of the Soviet Union. The massive pallets and netting show how relief can arrive as pure logistics. A factory worker carefully hand-paints shipping marks onto wooden crates of New Year gift parcels meant for frontline troops, December 1942. The neat script turns plain boxes into morale mail. Dozens of workers repave a Manhattan street by hand, lifting and resetting thousands of stone blocks, while shoppers and shop signs crowd the sidewalks. 1930. The photo catches a city being rebuilt one heavy cube at a time, right before smooth asphalt. A thick gray smog blankets a Pittsburgh bridge in 1952, turning rows of parked cars into fading shadows, while one lone car drives into the haze. The cloud came largely from coal smoke trapped by still winter air, a daily reminder of why the city later pushed hard for cleaner fuel. An American Marine rests in a rough pit of volcanic sand on Iwo Jima in 1945, reading a letter from home with his rifle beside him and gear scattered around the trench. On an island where every yard was fought over, that small sheet of paper was often the only quiet link to normal life. Silhouetted United States service members walk past a towering oil well blaze in Kuwait's Bergen oil field in 1991, with a tracked armored vehicle guarding the road. The fires came from sabotaged wells and burned for months. In 1915, on New York City's Lower East Side, a mother cooks in a cramped tenement kitchen while her 3 children pose beside a tiny table and a sink worn down by constant use. The big number scrawled on the window hints at official inspection or charity documentation. In Moscow in 1966, 2 patients lie in narrow therapy tubs with their heads held above the water by padded rings, a method doctors once used to calm bodies through temperature and long stillness. 3 Soviet infantrymen from the 3rd Ukrainian front fire from a snowy hillside over a fence into the rooftops and courtyards of Budapest during the 1945 siege. The steep Buda side of the city turned ordinary backyard lines into front lines. 2 German soldiers in winter 1942 march on patrol with rifles while hiding behind thick bundles of reeds like walking bushes. The improvised plant camouflage shows how close and deadly the front could be, where staying unseen mattered more than armor. George Curzon, the Viceroy of India, sits with his wife Mary atop the elephant Lakshman Prasad in Delhi in 1902, surrounded by silk, silver, and a sunshade like a moving throne. The animal's heavy jewelry turns a living creature into a state stage. A Cadillac DeVille glides past the shattered presidential palace in Grozny in 1995, turning luxury into a strange kind of witness. The calm, glossy car against that hollow concrete wall makes the whole city feel like a paused movie set where history just happened. A lone skier poses beside a snow-buried chairlift, right under a blunt sign that says, "Fasten safety belts," as the line disappears into white silence. The empty seats and frozen cable make it feel like a resort paused midday, with only her raised pole proving time is still moving. In Vladivostok in 1918, troops carry a long line of coffins covered with United States flags for 17 American soldiers killed during the chaotic foreign intervention in Russia. 5 sharply dressed men in suits and fedoras pose outside a rough wooden storefront with a hand-painted sign advertising a hotel in Hot Springs, Arkansas. The photo is often captioned as a 1930s meetup of famous bootleg-era bosses. In 1968, Tower Bridge jammed in the open position for 2 hours during extreme heat, stopping river traffic in the middle of London. This photo shows firefighters on a fireboat blasting cold water onto the bridge to shrink the hot metal enough for the moving parts to work again. This mid-1940s photo shows carnival performer Frank Kiefer in Idaho Falls, Idaho, holding a tangled bundle of snakes, like a living scarf for the Seabrand Brothers Carnival. Many handlers kept snakes calm by staying slow and steady, and by working during cooler parts of the day. In 1944, displaced sharecropper families line Highway 60 in New Madrid County, Missouri, with their whole lives stacked into carts and bundles at the roadside. The long row shows how one land decision could erase a family's home overnight. In August 1915, a Scottish Highlander sits shoulder to shoulder with Indian Dogra troops in a front-line trench in France, showing how far the British Empire moved people to fight on the Western Front. On February 24, 1913, at the Canadian Pacific Railway Ogden Shops in Calgary, Alberta, an overhead crane lifts a massive 280 consolidation steam locomotive as workers watch from the floor. In 1940, in Hamburg, a huge crowd reaches out with flowers as German soldiers ride BMW R-12 motorcycles through the city after France surrendered. In 1914, soldiers dug a deep pit through a farmer's floor, turning a simple home into a hidden fighting shelter. The bright window became their narrow lookout, and the packed earth inside kept them low and hard to spot. In Vienna in 1926, a male beauty contest lines up strongmen in simple briefs while judges sit at a table like it is a serious sport. In 1943, a giant consolidated Coronado flying boat sits low in the sea after an accident, with crew climbing the wing like it is a rooftop. In Yoshkar Ola in 1978, skiers test backpack propeller engines, trying to turn cross-country travel into a personal motorsport. The huge ring guard around each prop shows how dangerous this idea was. In 1967 in London, Barclays unveiled the first cash machine, letting people pull money from a wall instead of waiting for a teller. The very first user was actor Reg Varney, and the inventor John Shepard Barron pushed for a 4-digit personal code. In East Berlin, East Germany, in 1989, a KGB officer stands among locals as the old system begins to fall apart. In Washington, in 1923, a strongman at the Fun Fest lies under a car and uses a thick board to spread the wheel's weight across his body like a human bridge. This stunt worked because the board reduced the pressure on any one spot. Broadway in New York City in 1850 looks more like a work site than a famous avenue, with muddy streets, wooden scaffolds, and horse traffic squeezing past raw brick buildings. This was the moment when the city was racing upward and outward at once. This is Eugen Sandow in the 1910s, the showman who turned muscle display into a worldwide craze and helped invent modern bodybuilding posing. His name still lives on in the Sandow Trophy, and even Arnold Schwarzenegger has owned statues based on Sandow's famous physique. In Berlin in 1914, nurses care for a hospital patient while decorating a small tree beside the bed, mixing routine care with a fragile piece of home. These quiet comforts mattered because early war hospitals were flooded with injuries. In 1892, the paddle steamer Neches Belle runs her regular commercial route on the Neches River, a floating warehouse powered by steam and a single rear wheel. When railroads spread across Texas, they carried freight faster and on a fixed schedule. HMS Furious launched Sopwith camel fighters in 1918 for the Tondern Raid, one of the first air attacks launched from a ship with a flight deck. The pilots often could not safely land back on the ship, so the mission plan depended on ditching or reaching land after striking the Zeppelin sheds. In October 1862, President Abraham Lincoln stands in the Antietam camp beside General George B. McClellan, a meeting captured by photographer Alexander Gardner. Weeks after the bloodiest single day in United States history, Lincoln used visits like this to judge his commanders in person. In 1935, in Dorset, England, Thomas Edward Lawrence poses on his Bro Superior SS 100, a motorcycle so prized it was nicknamed the Rolls-Royce of bikes. After a later crash on the same road, what doctors learned helped push helmet safety forward. In January 1945, a lone figure looks down on Houffalize, Belgium, a key crossroads town scarred during the Battle of the Bulge after a major night air raid. Days later, the armies of Bernard Montgomery from the north and George Patton from the south linked up here. While you're looking at these photos, write in the comments which frame you like the most and why. I'm really interested. I'll definitely respond and discuss your choice. On December 31, 1944, near Sarreguemines, on the France-Germany border, a soldier of the 410th Infantry Regiment, 103rd Division, sits in the snow beside his machine gun and lights a pipe to welcome the new year. On September 20, 1991, near Sid by the Croatia border, a boy on a bicycle watches a Yugoslav People's Army tank roll toward the town as if a normal road has turned into a front line. The calm stance of a child beside a machine built for battle makes the moment feel unreal. Around April 1849 in India, this early photograph shows captured Sikh artillery lined up at Ambala Cantonment after the Second Anglo-Sikh War, recorded by surgeon photographer John McCosh. Each gun and wagon in the long row was both a weapon and a trophy. In February 1945 in Echt in the Netherlands, United States Army signalmen fix communication lines beneath graffiti that reads, "1918, never again," a blunt warning from the last war. In occupied Warsaw in 1944, Polish resistance worker Irina Sendler is pictured, a calm face behind one of the boldest rescue networks of the war. She helped move about 2,500 children out of the sealed Jewish district using false papers. On June 2, 1941, after the Battle of Crete, a German Fallschirmjäger stands facing local villagers who had rushed into the fighting with farm tools and household items. The photo captures a rare moment where an elite unit meets direct civilian resistance. In 1967 in Kuwait, a Khalaf shipwright shapes a massive wooden dhow on a forest of scaffolding, building an ocean boat with hand tools and trained eyes instead of blueprints. Many builders used imported teak for strength and rot resistance. In January 1950 in northern Vietnam, a packed boatload of refugees fleeing the Chinese Civil War is met and controlled by troops of the French Foreign Legion on the riverbank. The scene shows how one war pushed people across borders into another conflict zone. On December 11, 1949, People's Liberation Army troops stand on the Stone Arch of Friendship Pass, a gateway on the China-Vietnam border used for centuries by armies and traders. A single captured crossing like this could flip control of roads, customs, and supply lines. In Pushkin near St. Petersburg in 1917, this is the original amber room in the Catherine Palace, its walls covered with amber panels and gold leaf like a glowing furnace made of stone. In 1941, it was taken during the war and later vanished. Around 1900, Jewish worshippers gather at Jerusalem's Western Wall, pressing close to the ancient stones to pray at the last visible remnant of the Second Temple complex. In occupied France in 1942 to 1943, fighters of the Francs-Tireurs et Partisans crouch in brush with rifles, waiting for a signal in total silence. Their underground network used code names, hidden safe houses. In 1908, Marie C. Bolden became the first national spelling bee champion, an early winner from the era when newspapers treated spelling as a serious public contest. Her victory helped launch a tradition where one word can decide a national title. In 1986 at Chernobyl, cleanup crews called liquidators hauled heavy cables and shielding right beside the ruined power unit while cranes swung overhead. They worked in timed shifts measured in seconds to limit exposure to invisible contamination. In 1933 in Geneva, Germany's propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels was photographed smiling, then seconds later glaring after he was told the photographer was Jewish. The split captures how fast a public mass can drop into cold contempt. Soviet paratroopers cling to the wings of a TB-3 bomber before takeoff, a risky method used when early transports could not fit full squads inside. In the 1930s, the Soviet Union ran huge airborne drills and even tested dropping guns and light vehicles. In 1917, sailors sit in a high rangefinder post on the United States ship Wyoming, almost swallowed by smoke from the funnels below. Photos like this explain why later ships enclosed these posts and why switching from coal to oil made life on deck far cleaner and easier to control. In 1942, on Tarakan Island, a Japanese pilot grins at a small pet monkey perched on his arm, a rare soft moment in a harsh campaign. Mascots like this were kept for luck and morale, and the chain on the monkey hints at how quickly comfort could turn into control. In 1904, photographer Edward S. Curtis staged this image of Navajo, dying riders, fading into dust, and he titled it "The Vanishing Race" to push a dramatic story. Many scenes in his series were carefully arranged and cleaned of modern details. In 1979, Iranian women packed the streets to protest rules that would force a head covering, turning International Women's Day into a direct showdown over personal freedom. The photo freezes a rare moment when a newly changed state met a loud. On January 8, 1918, President Woodrow Wilson addressed the United States Congress and laid out his 14 points, a plan meant to shape the peace after the First World War. On January 9, 1915, Mohandas Gandhi arrived in Bombay from South Africa, stepping onto Indian soil with the strategy of satyagraha already tested in real campaigns. This landing mattered because within a few years he would scale that method to millions. A newspaper report says that 16 Arapaho from Wyoming, led by Chief Old Eagle, arrived in Paris in full regalia to appeal to the League of Nations for equal rights and recognition as United States citizens. The shocking part is that they crossed an ocean to ask foreigners to pressure Washington. In 1898, hundreds of New Yorkers skate on a frozen Central Park pond while the Dakota apartment house rises behind them like a castle on the edge of the city. In 1945 in Florida, a young woman smiles in a cotton field, holding a fresh bowl while the plants around her show the white fiber ready for picking. On January 11, 1937, in Flint, Michigan, sit-down strikers at General Motors, Fisher Body No. 2, clashed with police in the fight, later nicknamed the Battle of the Running Bulls. Workers threw car parts and blasted icy water from hoses while police used irritant gas. In 1934, at Boulder Dam near Boulder City, Nevada, a rigger stands on a cableway head tower, the moving crane system that carried buckets of concrete across the canyon. One mistake up there meant a long fall onto steel and rock. On August 11, 1944, in Roquencourt, France, Canadian soldiers drive a captured German Schwimmwagen after repainting it with Allied markings. The rear soldier holds a captured Gewehr .43 rifle. In 1852, this photo shows Conrad Heyer, a Revolutionary War veteran, aged 103. He is one of the earliest born people ever captured in a photograph and one of the few veterans of that war known to be photographed. In 1938, President Franklin D. Roosevelt met surviving United States Civil War veterans at Gettysburg during the 75th anniversary commemoration. The event included his speech dedicating the Eternal Light Peace Memorial. In 1912, Titanic survivors crowd into lifeboats as they are brought toward the rescue ship Carpathia in the open Atlantic. Carpathia picked up about 705 people, and these small boats were the only thing between them and freezing water. This is Christopher Robin Milne with his teddy bear, the real child whose nursery toys inspired A. Milne to create Winnie the Pooh. The bear's name, Winnie, came from a real bear at the London Zoo, and the Pooh part came from a swan Christopher liked. In 1922, the Hollywood Bowl opened as an outdoor hillside stage with no shell, so the sound simply spilled into the canyon. The first acoustic shell was added in 1926, starting the Bowl's long experiment with shaping music for a crowd this huge. In 1887 on the Champ de Mars, the Eiffel Tower is still just two giant steel legs rising from stone bases, with cranes and scaffolding filling the gap between them. Within about 2 years, this skeleton would become the tallest structure in the world. In 1964, Martin Luther King Jr. rides the Ford Magic Skyway at the New York World's Fair with his children, Yolanda and Martin Luther III. The attraction was built by Disney and carried visitors past life-size scenes. In the 1920s, passengers watch a movie inside an airplane cabin with a screen set up between the seats like a tiny flying theater. This is one of the earliest examples of in-flight entertainment. In April 1945, on a street in Vienna, Frontovoy cameraman Semen Abramovich Stoyanovsky films combat from a dirt cover while a soldier aims nearby. He was badly wounded on April 12th and died on April 19th. In 1929, at Dubendorf Airfield in Switzerland, Zurich variety dancers from Mascot pose as they board an Ad Astra Aero Dornier Mercure passenger plane. Early flights were loud and cold, so the leather coats, cloche hats. In 1908, at the St. Petersburg School for Deaf Children, a teacher explains a reading lesson while students watch the board and follow along in a tightly packed classroom. The scene shows early special education in action, using clear written prompts. In January 1910, the Seine flood turned the streets near Saint-Lazare station in Paris into a canal with people moving by boat past street kiosks and signs. On January 28th, the water reached about 8.62 meters. In 1918, during the Russian Civil War, United States troops in Siberia eat in the snow beside field kitchens and supply wagons, part of the Allied intervention. The strange detail is that the United States Army fought winter and distance here while guarding rail lines thousands of miles from home. On November 19, 1919, in Toronto, a large crowd rallies against compulsory vaccination during a smallpox outbreak in Ontario, waving signs like "Down with Compulsion." The posters show the same old playbook: fear, conspiracy claims, and dramatic slogans. In 1933, Sir Malcolm Campbell sits in the Bluebird, the land speed car that pushed past 300 miles per hour for the first time. The long body and huge tail fin were built to keep it stable on salt flats. In 1942, in Lubbock, Texas, a dog named Poochie sits on an aircraft wing wearing a Master Sergeant chevron and a Colt M1911 pistol holster as a mascot at a flight school base. Units used animals like this for morale. In 1982, a fire tears through Antarctica's Vostok Station, sending a thick smoke cloud into the polar night. In a place this remote, losing one building can threaten power, heat, and survival because there is no quick rescue coming. In 1969, Apollo 12 Commander Charles Conrad stands on the moon beside Surveyor 3, a robot lander that touched down there about 2 years earlier. Apollo 12 was the first mission to land close enough for a hands-on visit. In 1910, in Montreal, a record shop worker demonstrates a gramophone beside towering shelves packed with flat disc records in paper sleeves. This is the early music industry in one room: heavy horn speakers, hand-sorted catalogs. On August 6, 1947, in Hiroshima, residents march in a public parade marking 2 years since the atomic bombing. The flower hats and dancing in the street show a city forcing itself back to life while turning the anniversary into a loud call for peace. In the 1950s, Louis Armstrong shows off his personal reel to reel tape recorders, building a private studio in a hotel room. He obsessively recorded rehearsals, concerts, and even casual talk, creating a huge audio diary that let him study his own sound like a scientist. In February 1941, in French Indochina, Japanese sailors practiced judo on the dock beside their ship, drilling throws and grips as a form of close combat training. Doing it in bare feet on hard planks shows how serious the routine was. In 1944, an Australian Royal Air Force Lancaster carries nose art styled as a ballot, with "Vote for Joe" and the name Joseph Stalin, alongside leaders like John Curtin, Jan Smuts, Winston Churchill, and Mahatma Gandhi. It was a dark joke from aircrew culture. In 1944, during the Battle of Monte Cassino in Italy, French Red Cross ambulance drivers sit by a Dodge WC-54 and knit during a lull. The calm hands and loose yarn contrast with a vehicle built to haul the wounded minutes later. In 1956, animal trainer Margarita Nazarova feeds the tiger perch on a ship deck during filming for Striped Voyage. The tiny cage and open water around them show how the stunt relied on trust and nerves, not safety barriers. In 1965, on Novinsky Boulevard in Moscow, mounted police charged to break up Chinese and Vietnamese student protesters near the United States Embassy. The photo catches the split second when a horse and a crowd collide. On December 5, 1931 in Moscow, the Cathedral of Christ the Savior collapses into a huge dust cloud as it is being demolished. The building was cleared to make space for the planned Palace of the Soviets, a mega project that was never finished. In 1978 in Rhodesia, golfers play while an armed guard stands beside them carrying both a rifle and their golf clubs. The scene shows how a normal weekend game could share the same fairway with a security patrol. In August 1941, M. Soldatov searches the rubble of his destroyed home in Dorogobuj, Smolensk region, walking with a cane through a street of hollow walls. That summer, the front moved so fast here that families often saved what they could while the town changed control within weeks. In 1942, local residents in Stalingrad dug earth shelters between shattered apartment blocks, turning bomb craters and rubble into makeshift homes. In 1953, Inuit at a Christmas party in Repulse Bay, now Naujaat, Nunavut, Canada, pose inside a crowded shelter wearing heavy parkas. The man in the center sticks out his tongue with arms wide, a rare candid moment that shows how loud, playful. This 1930 photo shows Joseph Goebbels in formal evening wear, speaking with 29-year-old Maria Magdalena Quandt, later known as Magda Goebbels, who holds a flower and looks down. It is one of the few known images from their courtship before their wedding on December 19. A Dynamo Sports Society member marches under a huge bullseye sign announcing a world record, crediting Comrade Kalinin with a perfect 200 points from 40 shots at 50 meters in the late 1920s. British occupation soldiers play football on a field beneath the Ordensburg Vogelsang complex in the Rhineland, Germany in 1945. Built as a leadership training center for the National Socialist German Workers' Party. In 1908, the United States Census Bureau used this Hollerith electric tabulator to count huge stacks of punched cards faster than any team of clerks. This machine helped prove that information could be processed by hardware. In Washington in 1922, a police wagon hauls away jars of banned liquor after a prohibition chase ends with a smashed car on a slick street. Scenes like this turned a simple drink into big money for hidden networks. At this 1994 dinner, a former Soviet-era leader and his wife sit with a younger official whose calm presence hints at a huge future shift. What looks like a polite meal is really a crossroads moment. In 1968, this aerial view shows Washington, District of Columbia, with entire blocks burning after protests erupted following the killing of Martin Luther King Jr. The smoke marks one of the most intense weeks in the city's history. In January 1937, British press baron Lord Rothermere poses with Adolf Hitler at Berchtesgaden, far from the public eye. The image shows how private meetings and powerful newspapers could shape public mood as Germany pushed for more land across Europe. In 1989, a young boy snaps a candid photo of a famous British royal mother, capturing her relaxed smile in a private living room. The slightly tilted, flash-lit look is classic of simple point-and-shoot cameras. In Birmingham, Alabama, in 1963, a civil rights demonstrator is held by officers in the middle of a busy street as crowds watch. Photos like this spread nationwide and helped turn local protests into pressure that led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In Hamburg, Germany in 1961, George, John, and Paul sit on the roof of the Top 10 Club during the long club run that forged their live power. In 1928, near Dieppe, fashion icon Coco Chanel joins Winston Churchill and his son Randolph on a countryside hunt, looking like close friends, far from the spotlight. Years later, wartime files fueled claims that Chanel had secret ties to occupation-era intelligence. In the winter of 1941 in Amsterdam's Vondelpark, Anne Frank skates with friends, captured in a rare, everyday moment before her world closed in. Just months later, new occupation rules banned Jewish people from public parks. In Paris in 1965, bluebell dancers stand in a mirrored beauty salon, strapped into hip-slimming machines that promised a quick, perfect shape without effort. It is a sharp snapshot of the era's body pressure marketing. During the Second World War, London children who had been evacuated rushed back into their parents' arms, turning a crowded street into a single burst of relief. Many evacuees spent months or years away. In 1918, a tethered observation balloon floats above the British battleship HMS Queen Elizabeth, giving spotters a higher view to guide naval gunfire. This was an early drone-like system, powered by wind and rope. Pewley, a veteran cat of the Second World War, poses in 1959 wearing a tiny uniform cape with her medals and stars. She was already 15 years old then, a living reminder that even mascots could earn real honors. Private Henry James of the 121st Pennsylvania Infantry stands in a studio portrait, just 17 years old, before Gettysburg on July 1, 1863. It was likely a tintype, the cheap photo method that let families keep a real face close even as the American Civil War tore communities apart. Well, my favorite collection of historical photographs has come to an end. If you also have favorites, write in the comments exactly which ones and why, and I'll be happy to answer and chat.